Hi, Robo here. Recently, I got to sit down with Dr. Keith Latson, a board-certified surgeon, equine surgeon from California, who specializes in racehorse equine surgery. Dr. Keith is a well-respected veterinarian, and he is the current on-call veterinarian for the AAEP, the American Association of Equine Practitioners. He's basically the guy that is on TV to talk about healthcare for these athletes. And I really just wanted to sit down with him and pick his brain on the influences that can affect the health of these horses who are considered extreme athletes, who are under immense amount of pressure and stress, both with their training regimens and their feeding protocols and the travel schedules. So this interview was really great. It taught me a lot of stuff that I didn't know before, and I really hope that you enjoy it. So I'm just going to skip right to it. Here's Dr. Keith Latson. Thank you. Thanks for taking the time to sit here with me and go over this stuff. But, tell me a little bit about your history, your background. I know that you are a very accomplished surgeon in the racehorse community, and that you got your undergraduate, or you got your veterinary degree from Texas A&M, and then you went on to Davis.
I did. I went on to Davis for a 3-year surgery residency before sitting for the board exam for the American College of Veterinary Surgeons, and then went on to Santa Anita Park, Southern California, to the racetrack circuit, thoroughbred circuit there.
And, when you first got to the track, did you work under some experienced veterinarians and learn techniques and learned your way around the track?
Oh, sure. In fact, I started working for veterinarians in 1992 at the racetrack, and that was my first exposure to thoroughbreds. And I had no idea what I was in for. I had all of my life thought that I was going to be a human orthopedic surgeon. I knew I had some mechanical acumen and really enjoyed rebuilding motorcycles and those sorts of things. And so that seemed sort of an obvious segue to become an orthopedic surgeon, but I had no idea the world that existed out there for racehorses and being a part of maximizing their health and being there to help them out when they get injured. I mean, that's it's a high intensity sport, and the horses are the most raw example of athletic prowess that I could ever imagine. So when I first got to the racetrack and started working for these veterinarians, I just couldn't believe that there was this world out there that I had not yet discovered.
And that your introduction through that is what made you want to become the equine veterinarian in the first place.
Absolutely. First time I saw a horse bolting through the fog in the morning, when I showed up at the racetrack, I thought there's nothing that compares to this.
That's awesome. And so that basic pathway has taken you quite a ways. I know that you're currently not only a very accomplished equine practitioner, but you've stepped up at the AEP level as well recently. Can you tell me about the on-call program that you're now a part of?
Sure. What an honor and very humbling experience to be involved with the American Association of Equine Practitioners and their on-call program, where they select veterinarians to act as spokespeople with the media, both on camera and with the printed press, to just relate to the viewing public and to horse racing fans some of the common issues in racehorses. And if an injury does occur, or if something does occur during a race, a televised race, we're there to make sure that the correct information, health information, gets out about what happened with that horse, what the plans are for the horse, and what we can expect as that horse is tended to by its veterinarians. So that's been quite a humbling experience, and was fortunate to be a part of that during American Pharoah's win at the Belmont to take the Triple Crown last year. That was just that was a career pinnacle. I mean, just something you can only imagine. It's like when you're a kid and you're in your driveway basketball, shooting hoops, and you're counting down 3, 2, 1, and it's the game-winning score. You can't imagine that you would be there when something like that happens, and that's something that'll resonate. Those memories will resonate with me, and just as a cumulative experience of all of the things that I've seen and been involved with, and all the horses I've been involved with over the years at the racetrack, that was just something that really put an exclamation point on it for me.
Well, that's awesome. So in your line, in your practice, what are some of the more famous horses that you got to get your hands on and work with over the years?
Oh, I don't count my success by famous horses or famous trainers that I've worked with. While there have been quite a few Eclipse Award winners, stakes winners, lots of those. I think to single certain horses out, I think would be unfair to all the other horses that I've worked on as well, who give absolutely as much of themselves as the ones who are famous and who rise to the top in the racing game. So I think it would be unfair for me to single certain horses out. There are certainly those horses that I've become attached to because of their personalities, or because of how they greet me in the stall, or how I see them interacting with their groom. There are those horses that are particularly special to me. But again, the ones who were the famous horses and that I had an opportunity to interact with, there's a level of professionalism about those horses that is beyond compare.
You can tell a difference in the way just their presence.
Their presence, just when they're standing in the stall, they know that they are special. American Pharoah is one that, he would always come to the front of his stall to greet you. He's just such a cool personality. I took my 2 sons to meet him, and he came right up to the front of the stall and sniffed their hands and allowed both of them to pet him. And but when he walks on the track, there's a presence about him, and that presence carries back to when he's in the stall. There's no wasted energy by those horses in the stall or in anything that they do. They're professional all the time. Now that some of that has to do with maturity, some older horses will see that in as well. But particularly in the 2 and 3-year-old racehorses, the ones that are athletically special, they have a presence about them.
Well, that's fantastic. And so, these kind of where we're going with this conversation, obviously is going to be about health, the health in the horse, especially the supreme, extreme athlete, the 1%ers who are having to perform at a much higher level than most horses do, and the things that they require. Over the years, I'm assuming that you've probably gotten an overall idea of some of the main problems that continually happen with these kind of athletes. What kind of things do you continuously see coming across your board?
Sure. I think the ones that come to most people's mind, because they're the ones that we hear about most often, are the musculoskeletal injuries, fractures, and unfortunately, the ones that we hear about are the more severe fractures, like the Barbaros. And we learn something from those horses when those unfortunate events occur. The ones that we hear less about, that we as veterinarians at the racetrack contend with, are the health problems that are largely stress related. These athletes, these horses are under quite a bit of physiologic stress, intense physiologic stress, because of the intensity of training, because their feed programs are so intense. And because they're constantly moving, they're constantly training, they're constantly moving from one racetrack to another racetrack. They may be moving from one barn to another barn if it's a claiming horse, for example. So their feed programs are constantly changing. Their routine health programs, if they're changing from one practice to another practice when they change barns, even things like their deworming and vaccination programs may be altered from one practice to another. While each of those programs is probably excellent, each of the feed programs and healthcare programs is probably excellent, those horses are experiencing changes when they move from one barn to another. And that typically happens after they've been claimed out of a race. So they've gone through an intense period of physical activity during the race. There's the physiologic letdown from the race and recovery period from the race. And then they're immediately put into a new feed program. And so I think that's the most extreme example of the types of stress that can be layered on top of each other at the racetrack. In terms of just day-to-day stress, let's take, for example, a stakes horse who is not changing from one barn to another like a claiming horse would be, and may not be traveling from place to place as often as a lower-level horse might be. Those horses are still being fed high levels of grain, high levels of starch-containing grains. They are being exercised very intensely, and while they're treated like kings, they come back from the racetrack and they have their legs massaged and they get their baths and they cool out walking for an hour, and they get out to graze in the sun and eat some grass in the afternoons. The degree of stress on those horses is really intense. Fortunately, they're able to withstand that stress and perform mightily under that stress. But what that also means for us is that we have to be, as veterinarians and as caretakers of these horses, we have to be particularly careful about even minor changes, pushing them over that edge of physiologic stress where they may start to encounter problems like diarrhea or foot problems, just any of those stress-related problems, gastric ulcers. Those are the things that we're always looking for, any early sign, any indication that we need to act now before this gets any worse or goes any further.
And, you and I and Rob have had some pretty intense conversations about, preemptive measures to help alleviate some of the digestive problems that eventually cause the ulcers and the diarrhea and things like that. And, I'm sure that you've seen all kinds of things come and go. What are some more common nutritional products that you've seen have hit the market, and what are some of the problems that you've seen with those type of products?
Oh, I think, if we categorize the products or categorize some things out of feeding systems that people try to maximize, and we break that down into the forage that they're feeding, the grains that they're feeding, and how much of their grains they're feeding, and on top of that, how often, all of those things are important. And a change in any of those variables may create a significant result, whether it's a result to the positive or a result to the negative. Any change in those can be significant. And then we move to some of the supplements and the top dresses that people are using. And those span the spectrum from single ingredient supplements that are meant to alleviate muscle issues. Selenium, for example, vitamin E and selenium are often fed in combination with one another. And what we know from some feed sampling that we've done is that most horses are getting 6 to 7 times their selenium requirement. And so we see some problems with an imbalance of feeding too much of one supplement or trace mineral or vitamin and not enough of another, because it is a delicate balance. We know, for example, with calcium and phosphorus, particularly in young growing animals, the balance of those two has to be very specific. Otherwise, we can create problems by supplementing those. They have to be presented in a particular ratio for the age of horse and the stage of growth of that horse. And so some of the other things would be trying to increase energy without increasing starch. So, for example, people top dressing with oils, top dressing their grains with oils. So we see a lot of those things. We see a lot of supplements come in, flash of the pan, and then back out they go very quickly. And a lot of that is due to hearsay. So-and-so is using this, so maybe I should give it a try because they seem to be winning races. But when you look at some of the labels on these products, the amount of what would be considered effective supplement is not worth giving. Or you would have to give 3 or 4 or 5 times as much as what's recommended to have any effect. The issue there is when you start giving that much, you may be throwing off balance what you're giving of the other supplements that are also contained in that mixture. So that's been the traditional approach to feeds and feeding. And among barns, there are wide variances in how people feed, how much grain they feed, how often they feed, what supplements they're using, which indicates to me as a veterinarian that there is some confusion about what the best program might be. And so when you boil it down, what it really comes down to is how much daily energy are we giving this horse? How much protein are we giving them that can be broken down into amino acids to support all of that musculoskeletal development? And are we presenting it in a way to them that they can maximize the use of all of those nutrients that are being presented, rather than having those nutrients pass through as fecal energy rather than digestible energy?
Got it. Okay. And so, like if you were going to give someone advice on how to approach a feeding / nutritional program, and they don't have access to a lot of what these trainers have access to. Let's say it's someone that's got 2 or 3 performance horses. Maybe they're rodeo horses. Maybe they're equestrian hunter jumper horses. What would be some of your just layman's advice on how to approach it and how they might consider that in their program?
Well, there are some pretty specific guidelines that are out there, and it takes a little bit of research on the part of the horse owner to really learn how to use some of these guidelines to maximize their own feed programs. Only the trainers and the owners know their horses well enough to be able to implement some fine nuance in their feed program. But there are some basic building blocks of a feed program that are well documented. The National Research Council publishes the NRC requirements or recommendations for horses in different levels of work, or horses during gestation or lactation, or different ages of horses for ages and stages of growth. Within those recommendations, particularly for horses in exercise, there are recommendations for horses in light exercise, moderate exercise, heavy exercise. And so even lay people can go and look at those recommendations, work with their veterinarian to say, okay, here's what I'm feeding now. And we can take the feed labels, the feed tags, compare that to what the NRC recommends for their horses and their level of work, which for high-level performance horses, whether it's a barrel horse or a sport horse, 3-day eventer, dressage horses, even heavy-use trail horses or pack animals, those horses are working. And so together with their veterinarian, they can determine, okay, my horse is in a heavy level of work. It needs this much energy. It needs this much in vitamins A, D, and E. And then they can look at the feed tags and their supplements and say, okay, are we providing everything that this horse needs? And I think that's the best way to start. To know, the best thing is to have a baseline in your feed program. Mm-hmm. And once you have that baseline and you know that you're giving at a baseline what that horse needs, then you can start tweaking and saying, okay, well, I know that my horse is in massive work and it needs more energy. How can we provide that energy? Are we going to increase the amount of grain that we're feeding? So increase the amount of starch and carbohydrate in the feed. Well, if we're going to do that, there's a calculation where you can say, okay, if I'm feeding more than 0.5% of my horse's body weight in grain per day, so for a 1,000-pound horse, if I'm feeding more than 5 pounds of grain per day, I know that I need to split that into 2 separate feedings, maybe 3. And if I'm approaching that 1%, if I'm feeding 10 pounds of grain to a 1,000-pound horse, I need to split that into more feedings per day. And why is that? Because a horse, the stomach is very small compared to other species and relative size to the intestinal tract. And so if we're just adding more feed into what we're already feeding only twice a day, it doesn't mean that there's more digestible energy or more energy that can be absorbed. It just means that it's going to pass through the intestinal tract and back to the hindgut as whole feed. And that in itself has its own implications with health and creating diarrhea and laminitis and some of those other things. So what I'm saying, I guess, to summarize all of this is that it's most important to have that baseline. And then we figure out how can we maximize what we're presenting to each part of that horse's intestinal tract for it to absorb the nutrients that it needs to maximize its performance.
No, I like that a lot. That's actually real usable information.
And I should say, I'll tell you too that there are a few resources out there. We can post the resources somewhere for people to use, but there are a few resources that are really excellent synopses of what I've just said and can give people very actionable information so that they can go through those calculations, even if they don't want to work with their veterinarian, or if that's not something that their veterinarian is comfortable helping them out with. There are some very actionable calculations that can be done by just the horse owner going and grabbing their feed tags, grabbing their supplement labels, and determining, okay, is my horse getting everything that it needs? And then from there, I think it's reasonable to work with the veterinarian, work with their trainers, if it's a horse owner that's doing these calculations, to say, okay, where do we go from here to maximize our feed program?
You know, we talk a lot about the using the race car as a metaphor for the performance horse, and how much effort and time and resources that professional racing crews put into the engine itself and the fuel that goes into the car and the effect that it actually has, and how if a performance person wants to have that advantage, that true advantage, whether it be in a Western saddle or an equestrian saddle, probably one of the biggest catalysts for success would be rethinking their feeding program, maximizing the output of the energy, the output of the nutrients in the feed to gain an advantage on their competition, rather than all the resources going into training and pushing.
Right. I think that's well said. Horses are, particularly high performance horses, are Formula One cars. There's no question. Any small thing that goes wrong in that horse has a ripple effect across the entire system. And so whether we're talking about the GI tract and absorption of nutrients, or we're talking about musculoskeletal issues, or we're talking about respiratory issues, all of those things work in intense synergy with one another. I think in performance horses, we historically have been so focused on musculoskeletal health and respiratory health. And I say respiratory health, meaning both mechanical issues with breathing. People know about roarers and horses that displace, so those mechanical issues, but also the deeper issues within the lungs because of some of our common management practices and the exposure to dust and those things which horses in pasture normally aren't exposed to. So those are the two areas where we've focused historically so intensively. I think the old saying, no foot, no horse, yes, I believe it, but I also believe no gut, no horse. Without the absorption of nutrients and presentation of the proper nutrients at the proper levels, those horses are going to reach a plateau and they're not going to be able to get beyond it. We hear about people bonking in races endurance athletes, for example, bonking. And some people carb load, some people don't carb load. So there's been so much just energy and intensity that's been put into human performance nutrition that I think in the horse world, we've always approached it as we either need to feed more of the feed, or we need to feed more of the nutrients, or we need to feed more of the fats. I think a non-traditional way to approach it is to say, okay, we're feeding all of this stuff, good stuff, fats and starches and proteins, and we're trying to create energy. We're trying to fuel the body with this. And so is there anything that we can add to that system to sort of boost that feed rather than feeding more? Because we know that the rate of passage of the nutrients through the intestinal tract is just as important for allowing time for those nutrients to be absorbed as what we're putting in the intestinal tract. And so if we can put some things in that feed program or into the intestinal tract, like enzymes, because we know that enzymes are such an important component of small intestinal digestion and breaking down proteins to their amino acid components and allowing that amino acid absorption, is there something that we can add to that feed program to support the enzymatic digestion of those proteins in the appropriate place? And so that's the way that we're starting to approach it, and that's a pretty exciting thing. I haven't met any resistance to that, but it's something that takes quite a bit of discussion for people to understand, okay, I see where we're going. If I feed more, it doesn't mean we're absorbing more or that the horse is absorbing more. But if I feed the same amount and maybe I break it down to multiple feedings, maybe I add some things that allow the absorption of the nutrients in the right places along the intestinal tract, then we can shave off the hundreds of seconds that are important in barrel racing.
That's quite a different approach than what you normally hear. It is, but I think it's an approach that has been developing in human medicine and human nutrition for a long time, and it is really starting to take hold now in the veterinary community and with performance horses, performance animals. Well, that's fantastic. Is there anything else that you think that some of our watchers would want to know about how they might maximize their performance horses or avoid problems that we haven't discussed yet? Oh, that's such a broad question. That was terrible. To break that down into components, I think that would be a multi-day discussion or seminar series, and we would end up having to focus on feeding for
to decrease gastric ulcers, feeding for maximum nutrient absorption from the small intestine, feeding for maximum hindgut performance. The hindgut is 67% of the volume of the entire intestinal tract. And so we haven't even gotten there in just our discussion today. But that's the fermentative vat where a lot of the things, the fibers, that can't be digested in the small intestine, that's where they go, and that's where the horses produce energy out of cellulose, hemicellulose, those parts of plant materials. So we haven't even gotten back there, but that's where we start talking about bacteria and protozoa and fungi that are all doing their work to create volatile fatty acids out of much of those feedstuffs that are left over from the small intestinal tract, so that we can create energy there too. And what we know is that when things are passing too quickly through the small intestine and inappropriate amounts of energy, like carbohydrates, starches from sweet feeds, for example, or grains, get back to that hindgut, we can really create some problems back there, because the bacteria go crazy. They love it. But they love it so much that they start producing gases, they start producing endotoxins and all sorts of other things that create a cascade of events that can cause colic, that can cause laminitis. And so if we focus on each of those areas of the intestinal tract for maximizing the health in those areas, then I think that's where we get our maximum synergistic kind of level of performance in our feed programs.
So, I mean, by the way, I did throw you a curveball there, but you hit it out of the park. That was really good. So, I mean, basically what you're saying is that people just need to think a lot more whole animal, and consider the different elements that are, it's not just an in function and an out function.
That's right.
There's several different stops along the way, and every one of them have a different physiological effect in the extraction of nutrients, in the processing of energy, and then also in just getting the keeping the horse overall healthy. And this information you're talking about with the bacteria in the hindgut and things like that, is that also some stuff that kind of came out of human testing and human literature?
Sure. There have been studies and meta studies done on bacteria in the gut and on the human microbiome. And there's a lot of exciting research coming out from that realm. We have known for a long time that it's vitally important for the horse to have a healthy bacterial population within its gut. We know that when there's a massive shift in pH or in water balance in the hindgut, that there's some deleterious effects. There are types of bacteria that take over and produce toxins that just wreak havoc on not just the gut, but on the horse. And so, that's where we start talking about the laminitis cascade coming from endotoxemia. And where do those endotoxins come from? They come from an imbalanced gut. And there are very few cells that line the gut. I mean, there are millions and probably billions of cells that line the gut, but there's a very thin layer of cells that is the protective layer against absorption of the negative things that can be produced within the gut by those bacteria if they're thrown off balance. And so one of the things that is just coming into the fold at least in equine medicine, is determining whether there are probiotic strains that are beneficial for the hindgut. Are there probiotic strains that actually make it to the hindgut? Are there probiotic strains that survive the acid environment of the stomach, the enzymatic environment of the small intestine, and make it to their point of necessary action? All of those things are becoming very popular topics within equine medicine. I think we've worked really diligently to produce some products that in combination with nutritionists at Texas A&M, we feel are are on the cutting edge of using that information and creating a support system for horses in any level of work, but particularly horses that are in high stress. So those are horses, whether it's a high-level performance horse or it's a horse that's going in for surgery or coming out of surgery, more importantly, with the stress of anesthesia, whether it's a horse that, it's a mare that is just foaled. I mean, that is a massive point of stress, both for the mare and for the foal. So we've worked really hard to create products that we believe in and would use on our own patients. And would recommend to our friends to give to their horses and still maintain a friendship. I mean, it's really important for us to believe in our products enough that we would use it on our own horses and we would recommend it to our mom to give to her horse. And so, yes, in answer to your question, that holistic approach is really important for maximizing the health of the horse, because I really do believe that no gut, no horse.
Yeah. Well, that's really good. And I just want to thank you so much. My takeaways so far have been, get some basic education on such an important topic. And, I think that people, we as performance horse people tend to spend a lot of time on tack, on training techniques, and we don't spend near enough time on the actual engine that makes the horse run and the fuel that we're putting inside of them, which can make huge differences in outcomes. So get some basic information so that you have a baseline. Pay attention to the tags, pay attention to the labels. Know and understand what's actually in the products that we're giving them, both for not having enough or having too much.
Right.
Over supplementation can be just as bad as under supplementation.
That's right.
And then knowing and understanding that it's a complex system and you have to set up and cater to that complex system. And if you do those things consistently and you do those things correctly, you're going to not only avoid problems, but you're also going to increase the impact in the performance of your animal.
That's right. And I think as actionable information for people going away from this video, there are a couple of resources that are very reliable and really easy to get in touch with. One is an extension agent. Extension agents, many people don't think about extension agents anymore as really being some of the definitive experts on feeds and feed programs. And particularly in the horse world, we don't think about extension agents as that expert resource anymore, more so in the livestock world. But there are some really fantastic extension agents out there that want to help. They love horses, they love performance horses, and they want to help. Working with your veterinarian, I think, is critically important if you're considering going through a feed program change. Working with your veterinarian to ensure that it's a successful feed program change, and so that we're not doing anything that may be dangerous to the horse in changing that feed program or our supplementation program. And lastly, nutrition programs or nutrition departments at universities that have veterinary schools are a fantastic resource. They love connecting. The nutritionists at Texas A&M, for example, love connecting with horse owners and performance horse owners to help them maximize their horse's performance through their feed programs. And then the last resource is the links that we can post on our website for folks to go to. And there are just some 4-page PDFs that give some really actionable advice and some great baseline information for people to help people understand feeds and feeding.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So once again, thanks for joining me, Keith, and visiting today. I think that we've got some great information, and I look forward to seeing you again and hanging out.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right. Take care.
See ya.